Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Volume 1, Crusades prior to the rise of the Ayyubid state. Start of Part 3 of Chapter 3. Jekermish persists in Jihad. In spite of some negative signs that followed the Muslim victory in Balkh, Jekermish continued to aspire to achieve other victories in this field. Less than 2 years later, that became possible for him, when at the end of 499 Hijri, that is 1106 Common Era, he received instructions from Sultan Muhammad to launch a new campaign against the Crusaders. He contacted local rulers and was able to form an alliance, which included Radwan, the ruler of Aleppo, Al-Ghazi al-Artuqi, the ruler of Mardin, Albi Timurtash, the ruler of Sinjar, and Al-Aspahad Sawa, one of the rulers of Persia. However, what Al-Ghazi suggested to the aforementioned rulers delayed implementation of the suggested plan. He asked them to start their campaign by moving against Jekermish, with the aim of capturing Mosul so as to earn the pleasure of Sultan Muhammad. This latter held a grudge against the ruler of Mosul because of his actions. Moreover, there was the possibility of utilizing the financial and military resources of Mosul against the Crusaders. The leaders agreed to this and joined forces to attack Nusaybin, which belonged to the ruler of Mosul. However, the representatives of Jekermish in that city succeeded, with instructions from their master in Mosul, in provoking a rift between Radwan and Al-Ghazi. Radwan took the opportunity during a feast held before the walls of Nusaybin to kidnap Al-Ghazi and put him in chains. Al-Ghazi's Turkmen followers managed to release him, and they launched a surprise attack against Radwan's camp, forcing him to withdraw to Aleppo. The breakdown of this alliance began to show before even a single step was taken towards its original aim of fighting the Crusaders. But none of that shook Jekermish's resolve to attack the real enemy. Once he had dealt with the efforts of these rulers allied against him, he hastened to launch an attack against Edessa. He overcame the attacks launched by the troops of Richard of Salerno, who was ruling Edessa at the time on behalf of the imprisoned Baldwin. As soon as Jekermish returned to Mosul, however, he was faced with new troubles regarding the Seljuks. Only a short time passed before Kilij Arslan ibn Sulaiman, the Sultan of the Seljuks of Rum, moved to attack Edessa, and the representatives of Jekermish and Haran took the opportunity to send word to him that they would surrender the city to him. Kilij Arslan arrived and entered Haran, and the people rejoiced at the jihad against the Franks. He stayed there for several days, after which he had to return to his own land because of a severe illness that struck him. But he left behind a group of commanders in Haran to protect it. It seems that Kilij Arslan began to prevail because of the power, independence and influence over his counterparts among other Muslim rulers in the region that he enjoyed due to their ongoing disputes and conflicts aimed at achieving limited local victories. Moreover, the problems that Jekermish was facing in Mosul and the deterioration of his relationship with the Seljuks kept him from focusing fully on the jihad against the Crusaders. This led to Kilij Arslan coming to the attention of Jekermish's representatives in Haran, who summoned him and surrendered the city to him. This explains what happened shortly afterwards, when Kilij Arslan was summoned by the people of Mosul, so that he could rule them as well, after their ruler Jekermish was killed. Jihad of Jekermish and Suqman ibn Artuq. Crusader hordes in Syria and Palestine. The many princes who had not taken part became eager to go to the east, motivated by personal, worldly ambitions to acquire booty and land, above and beyond the religious motives of attaining reward and forgiveness. It is said that the Crusaders in the East were in urgent need of fighters and colonists with the following aims. 1. Continuing the war against the Muslims. 2. Further expansion. 3. Guarding what they had already gained. And 4. Protecting these gains from any attempt on the part of the Muslims to recapture them. Western society responded to this phenomenon with a wave of new crusader energy, which led to the flow of more crusader masses towards the east. The Lombards formed the first of these groups, setting out from northern Italy in 494 Hijri, that is 1101 Common Era, led by Anselm of Puis, the Archbishop of Milan, and accompanied by a number of rulers, including Albert Count of Vachin, Gibert Count of Parma, and Hugh Count of Montebello. It seems that this Lombard group, despite the large number of its participants, was no different in quality from the masses that had gone before, because it included only a small number of fighting knights. The vast majority were common folk who did not know how to fight and were lacking in discipline. When they reached the outskirts of Constantinople, they committed acts of plunder and pillage which made the Byzantine emperor hasten to send them on to Asia Minor. That occurred in Jumada I, that is March. They settled in Nicomedia, awaiting the arrival of other crusader groups. In fact, it was not long before another group arrived, composed of Frenchmen led by Stephen, Count of Blois. He was joined by a number of other rulers, such as Stephen, Count of Burgundy, Hugh, Count of Vermandois, Baldwin, Count of Hainaut, and Hugh Pierrefonds, Bishop of Macon, in addition to a German expedition led by Conrad, Count of Luxembourg. This group crossed the Bosphorus and camped at Nicaea, close to the Lombard camp. The number of people gathered there was between 200,000 and 300,000 fighters. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos appointed his friend Raymond of Toulouse as their commander-in-chief, and they were joined by a number of Byzantine troops led by Tsidas. The Battle of Merzifon. The huge Crusader army moved from Nicomedia to Dorylaeum with the aim of reaching the Holy Land, provided that during its march it would reopen the route through Asia Minor. Hence the emperor ordered Stephen of Blois to take the army via the route that the previous crusaders had taken, which passed through Dorylaeum and Konya. The Lombards refused to head towards the Holy Land until after Bohemond was freed, for they viewed him as an exemplary model and a hero, and the only warrior they trusted to lead them to victory. They insisted that the campaign head towards Cappadocia, and Ibn al-Athir states that the aim of this crusader campaign was to free Bohemond. In spite of the arguments from some of the leaders, the campaign headed towards the Danishmend lands via Ankara, which belonged to Kilij Arslan. They then made their way to Gangra, which is located south of Paphlagonia, so as to take the main route leading to Amasya and Niksar. With the intent of slowing down the Crusaders' progress, Kilij Arslan resorted to a gradual withdrawal ahead of the Crusader force, following a Bedouin-style method of destroying the land as he withdrew, burning everything that could be of benefit to the Crusaders, especially food supplies. At the same time, Turkish forces started gathering in a new alliance to confront the Crusader menace. Kumishtagin Ahmed, the Danishmend, renewed his alliance with Kilij Arslan, and urged Radwan, the ruler of Aleppo, to send a number of troops. The Crusaders reached Ankara, where they found the Turks present in full force and were unable to capture the city because of its strong fortifications. They were forced to march on, after plundering neighboring villages. They grew exhausted because of the lack of food supplies, extreme heat, and pressure from the Turks. In order to avoid imminent destruction, Raymond suggested that the army should head northeast towards Kastamonu and thence towards one of the Byzantine cities on the Black Sea coast. The journey towards Kastamonu was very slow and hard because of the lack of food, as the Turks had destroyed all crops and filled in the wells, and because the Crusaders were exposed to sudden Turkish attacks. So they scattered, not caring about anything, before Raymond could bring them back together. When they reached the outskirts of Kastamonu, Raymond had to find a route among the masses of Turkish troops to the coast. But the Lombards again insisted on heading towards the east, and he gave in to them. The Crusader army crossed the Helis River into the Danishmend lands, and some of them reached the city of Merzifon, located halfway between the river and Amasya. When the Turks realized that the Crusader forces had become exhausted, they attacked them, and it was not long before the Crusaders collapsed and fled the battlefield, under the pressure of the fighting, leaving behind their women and the monks. Raymond fled to a small hill where he hid until the French and Germans rescued him. He then fled during the night after having despaired of achieving any victory, leaving behind the Crusader camp and the non-combatants in it to fall into the hands of the Turks as booty. The battle was followed by a chase in which no one escaped except the knights, and the Crusaders' losses amounted to 4/5 of the army. The Turks seized a large amount of weapons and a great number of prisoners, whom they sold into slavery. Raymond soon reached Bafra, the small Byzantine port on the Black Sea near Sinop. From there he was taken by a Byzantine ship to Constantinople. The Latin historian Albite of Aix points out that Raymond received a bribe from the Turks to lead the army to Kastamonu, but this is unlikely, because anyone who studies the course of the campaign and the events that accompanied it will see how much effort Raymond put into trying to convince the Lombards not to head towards the lands of the Danishmend first of all, then how he tried to save the army from the dilemma into which he had fallen, and how he only chose the route to Kastamonu because of the troubles to which his army had been exposed. As for his flight from the battlefield, that was the result of his realization that there was no point in continuing after the Lombards had turned tail and fled, followed by the Pecheneg mercenaries. The First Battle of Heraclea. The disaster that befell the Crusaders at Merzifon erased the fame that they had acquired as the result of their victory at Dorylaeum. What made it worse was that this was not the last disaster. At the same time as the Lombards left Nicomedia, a French army of 15,000 knights and foot soldiers, led by William Count of Nevers, arrived in Constantinople. William was eager to join the Lombards quickly, so he left Constantinople, heading for Nicomedia, where he found out that the Crusader hordes had left, heading for Ankara. He traveled to that city, which he reached easily, but no one knew in which direction those hordes had gone. All the Count could do was head for Konya. When he reached it, he besieged it, but a group of Seljuk Turkish troops defended it. All his attempts to capture it failed, so he left it. During the same period, the Seljuks and their allies finished destroying the Lombard army, and Kilij Arslan and Gimustegin Ahmed, the Danishmend, learned of the approach of a new enemy whilst they were still savoring their victory. They headed south and beat William to Heraclea. William's troops traveled slowly from Konya, heading east, and when they came to place near Heraclea, utterly exhausted, the Turks attacked them. Their resistance collapsed after a battle which did not last long, and the entire French army met its end, apart from William and 6 of his followers. The Second Battle of Heraclea. At the same time as William's campaign was marching through Asia Minor, the final group of these crusaders, consisting of French and Germans led by William DC, Duke of Aquitaine, and Welf IV, Duke of Bavaria, reached Constantinople. The number of their troops was 60,000. This horde set out from Constantinople, heading for Konya, following the same route that Bohemond had taken before. The Turks implemented the same plan as before, burning crops, destroying food supplies, and filling in wells. When the horde reached Konya, they found the city empty. The Seljuk garrison had vacated the city after resisting William's attack, carrying with them all the supplies in the city, and even stripping its gardens and orchards of anything that could be of benefit to the Crusaders. The Crusaders did not stay in Konya for long before heading towards Heraclea, via a route that was 55 miles long. They suffered a great deal of hardship, with extreme hunger and thirst, enduring Turkish attacks from time to time in which some were killed. When they entered Heraclea, they found the city deserted. The Muslims were lying in wait for the Crusaders, heading in the forests around Heraclea, and they ambushed them when they were drinking water from the river that emerges behind the city. The Crusaders fell into disarray and the Turks pounced on them and destroyed them utterly, except a very few of whom managed to escape with difficulty, among whom were William X and Wolf IV. These headed for Tarsus and thence to Antioch. Outcome of the battles of Kilij Arslan. Each of these groups met a very sad end, which affected the course of the Crusader movement on one hand, and on the other hand affected the Turks in general, and the Seljuks in particular. The most important of these effects were as follows. A. The Seljuks exacted revenge for what had befallen them at Dorylaeum. After that they would never again be expelled from Anatolia. These consecutive victories also raised their morale. B. The route that crossed Asia Minor into Syria remained unsafe for both Crusader and Byzantine armies, despite the successes of the first Crusader groups in penetrating it. The Crusader migrants became afraid to take this land route, which led from Constantinople to Edessa, unless they were in huge armies. They were no longer able to come except by sea, which incurred huge expenses that few were able to afford. This land route remained closed to the Crusaders for several years. C. The Crusaders blamed the Byzantines for the calamities that had befallen them, and held them responsible for what had happened. Rumors spread amongst them that Raymond had been acting on the emperor's instructions when he took the army that he was leading away from the designated route, so that the soldiers would meet their deaths in a previously planned ambush. In fact, Rome wanted to find a scapegoat to bear responsibility for its mistakes, so they put the blame on the Byzantines and regarded them as responsible for the disasters that had occurred. D. Kilij Arslan's pride grew after these victories, and he was soon joined by the Turks of Anatolia. He was able to seize control of the interior, after which he stayed in his capital Konya, which lay on the main route connecting Constantinople to Syria. E. The Danishmend continued their conquest in the Euphrates Valley with no obstacles, and they reached the edges of the kingdom of Edessa. They also conquered Malatia, capturing its ruler on 23 Zulhijjah 495 Hijri, that is 18 September 1102 Common Era. F. The Crusaders' departure to Syria led to a new round of disputes and competition between the Seljuks and Danishmend. The two great Turkish tribes fought to take possessions of Malatya and take the ransom for Bohemond. Thus the Turkish front in that region disintegrated. Consequences of the death of Kilij Arslan. Zangi ibn Jekermish contacted Kilij Arslan I, asking him for help. At that time he was in Malatya, and he promised to hand Mosul and the surrounding area over to him. The Seljuk Sultan Kilij Arslan took this opportunity to expand his territory at the expense of the warring rulers, so he hastened to help Zangi. When Jawali learned of his march, he withdrew from the city, especially since Jekermish had died suddenly in captivity, and he had intended to use him as a bargaining chip. He also realized that Kilij Arslan I was so powerful that he would not be able to confront him in battle face to face. Hence he decided to form an alliance against him so as to support his own position. Despite this, Kilij Arslan I was able to enter Mosul, where he was welcomed by the population. He promised to respect their freedom and made some administrative arrangements. As for Jawali, he withdrew to Sinjar, where he held discussions with Al-Ghazi al-Artuqi and Radwan, the ruler of Aleppo, at the end of which they agreed to drive Kilij Arslan I out of Mosul. Then after that go to attack Antioch. The war against Kilij Arslan I ended with his defeat. He drowned in the Khyber River in 500 Hijri, that is 1107 Common Era. Kilij Arslan I is regarded as one of the prominent figures produced by the Seljuks of Rome, and the Near East was affected by his sudden death. The Seljuks of Rome, among whom no strong leader appeared to take place of Kilij Arslan, was subjected to increasing pressure from the Byzantine Empire, which resumed its interference in their internal affairs. Alexios Komnenos managed with ease to regain his control over the western parts of Asia Minor and along the southern coast. The death of Kilij Arslan extended the life of the great Seljuk state by nearly 100 years. Sharp divisions in the state between the sultans and emirs, fighting to gain the throne, and the numerous civil wars among them, in addition to the external dangers surrounding them, such as the dangers posed by the assassins and crusaders, encouraged Kilij Arslan to interfere in eastern affairs so as to gain authority and leadership, and to unite again all Seljuk power in the east. He would have been able to achieve this dream of his, because both internal and external political circumstances were favorable, but his death spared the greater Seljuks and lengthened their lifespan. The death of Kilij Arslan is regarded as a very important stage in the separation of the Seljuks of Rome from the Seljuks of the East, because the internal and external dangers surrounding the greater Seljuk state prevented them from interfering in the affairs of the other Seljuk branches, especially in Syria and Asia Minor. It is worth mentioning that the state of the Seljuks of Rome still, up to this time, belonged nominally to the greater Seljuks, and did not become completely independent until 552 Hijri, that is 1157 Common Era. The death of Kilij Arslan deprived the Seljuks of Syria of a force which could have guaranteed unity among them, as Seljuk power in Syria began to shrink rapidly because the two sons of Tutush, Radwan and Dakkak, did not have the political acumen to enable them to confront the worrisome circumstances that Syria was going through at the end of the 5th century Hijri, that is 11th century Common Era, and the beginning of the following century. Perhaps the greatest sign of diminishing Seljuk authority in Syria, Iraq and elsewhere was the emergence of a larger number of dynasties, which all had something in common: a connection to the Seljuk family name. From those families emerged political units headed by regents known as atabegs. The death of Kilij Arslan removed a serious danger from the Byzantine emperor at a critical time, because Bohemond was preparing to attack the Balkans in 501 Hijri, that is 1107 Common Era, starting out from the well-fortified fortress of Durazu, and Alexios Komnenos had sacrificed his southeastern border to save Durazu. He had made a treaty with Kilij Arslan, according to which he got military aid from him, but his sudden death and the absence of any strong leader to take his place gave Alexios the opportunity to focus on confronting the danger of Bohemond, whom he defeated in 502 Hijri, that is 1108 Common Era. The death of Kilij Arslan made the situation in Asia Minor volatile, because the oldest of his four sons, Malik Shah, became a prisoner in the hands of Sultan Muhammad after the Battle of Al-Khabur, whilst his widow gained control of Malatya and the eastern regions, with the help of the Emir Aidabar, who acknowledged the authority of Tughril Arslan, the youngest son of Kilij Arslan, over Byzantine territory. As for the other two brothers, Mas'ud and Arab, the former lived in Danishmand region, and the latter settled in Konya. The collapse of the central authority among the Seljuks of Rome was not to the advantage of the Byzantines, because the Seljuks continued to raid the empire's lands. Despite that, the Byzantine emperor was able to capture some fortresses in the bordering regions, but he did not want to venture into Cilicia or Syria. This attitude of his worked in the favor of the Seljuks, who were devoting their efforts to dealing with their internal problems. Jawali Sakawa, after the death of Kilij Arslan, who drowned in the Khyber River in 500 Hijri, that is 1107 Common Era, it became possible for Jawali to enter Mosul, but because of the savagery that accompanied his rule, he soon became hated by its people. He did not do anything more than Jekermish had done with regard to outwardly accepting the authority of Muhammad, despite the fact that he delivered sermons in that ruler's name in Mosul, as he declared his independence and cut off all ties with him. This prompted Sultan Muhammad in Dulqada, 501 Hijri, that is June 1108 Common Era, to give one of his men, Maudud ibn al-Tuntash, the task of expelling Jawali from Mosul and taking his place as governor. Thus Jawali was forced to flee from Mosul a second time. He went to Mesopotamia, where all the enemies of the Seljuk state rallied around him, chief among whom was the Arab Banu Mazid tribe. He did not hesitate either in forming an alliance with the neighboring Crusader forces. He released Balwin Duburak, the ruler of Edessa, and formed an alliance with him against the Seljuks. Maudud entered Mosul, where he was welcomed by the inhabitants, in Safar 502 Hijri, that is September 1108 Common Era. End of part 3 of chapter 3.